Amen. Well, good morning, Cornerstone family. We are in our last week of the series, How to Thrive in 2025. Now, for those that don't know who I am, I'm Todd McGlinchey, and I am the Connections Pastor here. We have covered some great topics during the series, haven't we? Yeah. But if I were to say, what's the most important thing you can do to help thrive in 2025? I would say to get into a small group. Now, of course, you'd expect me to say that small groups are important, right? But I want to back this up with what God has to say, okay? As I was praying back in November, I felt this thought. Does everybody here know why we do small groups? And does everybody even know what exactly a small group is? Well, here's one thing that I do know, okay? There was a study that discovered that if a person comes to church, if they have 7 good friends by the end of the year, they stay at that church. But if they don't, they tend to leave. You see, people come to a church to hear the pastor, but they stay in a church because of relationships. And that is found best in small groups. So I hope you hear me out about small groups because I really do want to see each and every one of you here next year, right? I mean, small groups are not just a program, they are a lifestyle. And it is the best environment to grow. And as we say in every Cornerstone family newsreel, right? Life change does happen best in a small group. All right, so here's a quote that I've been wrestling with, and you should probably see it on the screen, and you might even want to take a picture of it, okay? But here's what it says. The most eloquent testimony to the reality of the resurrection is not an empty tomb or a well orchestrated pageant on Easter Sunday, but rather a group of people whose life together is so radically different, so completely changed from the way the world builds a community, that there can be no explanation other than that something decisive has happened in history. That is the power of small group. Living out Jesus' principles in a community of friends is the best witness to this world and to your neighbors. All right, so some of you, might be wondering, okay, so what exactly is a small group that he keeps talking about? So, small groups generally consist of 8 to 12 people who usually meet in homes, okay? Groups commit to share life and faith together. Now, a great group includes time for both relational connection and studies that challenge members to grow spiritually. A typical group meeting will consist of social time, study, prayer, and of course, time for food or snacks, right? I mean, the saying is true if you feed them, they generally will come, okay? Now, groups typically meet for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So basically, that's what a small group looks like. So now I'm going to give you 3 reasons why we believe small groups are important. And the first reason is that small groups are biblical. Small groups are biblical. We need to start with the biblical basis for small groups. I mean, we didn't just make this up, okay? Everything that we do at Cornerstone, we follow a biblical reason of why we do what we do. And I can't start without referencing the passage in Genesis from the last time that I was up here. So we're going to look at the first part of Genesis 1, verse 26. And it says this: let us make man in our image after our likeness. So, right there from the creation story, we see that we were made for community by community. I mean, the God who desires to have a relationship with all humankind has always known meaningful relationships. Always. God is a relational being, and he created his prized creations, you and me, right, with the need for significant relationships as well. And Genesis 2:18 introduces us to the first problem ever in the Bible, okay? And God says that it is not good for the man to be alone. And why? Well, from God's perspective, it is not good for living life alone, okay? It's not good because it's not how he created us to live. Alone and isolated were never used to describe his children. All right, so now I want to look at a quote from Dr. Henry Cloud. And for those that might not know who Dr. Henry Cloud is, he's a famous Christian author and a psychologist, right? And he sums up this very well. He says, God created us with a hunger for relationship with him and with our fellow people. At our very core, we are relational beings. And he goes on to say, the soul cannot prosper without being connected to others. I mean, that's pretty compelling, right? I want to read that last part one more time. The soul cannot prosper without being connected to others. All right, so now let me give you an Old Testament model for small groups, and then I'll give you a New Testament model, okay? So in the Old Testament, we go to Exodus chapter 18. In Exodus 18, the problem is Moses was doing all the work by himself and he was burning out, okay? Now remember Moses, he was God's chosen person to deliver his people out of slavery in Egypt, right? He becomes the leader of, probably over 1 million people. So we pick up the story in Exodus 18, 17 to 24. And Moses' father-in-law, his name is Jethro, is replying to Moses, and he says this, what you are doing is not good. I mean, you and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and 10. Okay, have them serve as judges for the people at all times. But have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide for themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. And if you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain. And all these people will go home satisfied. Now, Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything that he said. So here we see Moses was the judge, he was a counselor, and he was a doctor for the entire congregation of over 1 million people. And it wasn't working out for him, was it? I mean, and one day as Moses is burning out, right, his father-in-law sees what's going on in his life. And so Jethro, I guess you can say, is the first management, he gives management consultation. I guess he was the first management consultant of the Bible, okay? And he says to Moses, here's what you got to do. You have got to learn to delegate. And the solution, he said, is to divide up your ministry so that the people's needs will be cared for in smaller groups. And in Exodus 18:17, he says, here's what you need to do. You need to appoint leaders, leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of 10. He said to appoint leaders of 10. And by the way, what is a leader of 10? A small group leader, yes. So why do we say a leader of 10? I mean, why is 10 kind of the ideal number we'd like to have in a small group? Well, once you get more than 10 people in a small group, somebody usually stops talking. Somebody will shut down. Because the larger the group gets, the more domineering the loudest speaker becomes. The whole purpose of small groups is fellowship and discipleship, not for people to sit still while one person does all the talking. It is there for all to share and have interaction. That's why some of my best small group leaders aren't necessarily theologians, but they are great facilitators of discussion who care for people. This is how it works here. The pastors could never meet everyone's needs by ourselves, right? That's why we have to have help. That's why we have to have small group leaders and volunteers. Now, I want to tell you about one of my small group leaders. Her name is Terry Davis, and she's a small group leader in Harmony. And, her group in Harmony started because of a Sunday morning here in 2017. So she visited with her daughter, and that was the first time that she was even introduced to the concept of small groups. Her daughter leaned over and said, you should start a small group so that you can meet, godly friends in your neighborhood. So, she had recently just moved to Harmony from Amelia Island to be closer to her daughter and to her grandchildren. So she signed up to lead one of our church-wide campaigns. It was the 40 Days of Prayer, which was a great series, and she became the leader in Harmony. We needed a leader in Harmony. Just like Moses, the pastors can't be everywhere. We need leaders and volunteers like Terry to help in every neighborhood around the church. Terry appreciates the resources and study guides that we provide for her on our website online, right? Because it's still our job as pastors to equip these leaders. Now, Terry loves a decision that she made over 7 years ago, and of course, she loves the people in her community. And she does have a lot more to say, but for time's sake, she'll be in the back of the table, after the service if you want to talk to her about her experience as a small group leader. And if you would like to know how to be a small group leader in your neighborhood, you don't have to be a Bible expert. Okay, if you can invite 2 friends or 3 friends or neighbors, you're off to a great start to be a small group leader. And I would love to talk to you if you're interested in that idea. Okay, now the whole purpose of Jethro's system was to help people's needs be met. And the result was that Moses was relieved, right? And the Bible says everybody had their needs satisfied there in verse 23 of Exodus 18. So in the Old Testament model, God says if you really want to minister to people, you have to break it down into smaller groups like 10 people each. That is the same model we are following for our small group system. All right, now let's look at the New Testament model found in the book of Acts. So we're going to look at the growth of the church in Jerusalem, and we're going to start in Acts chapter 1:15, which should be on your screen. So Acts 1:15 says this: In those days, Peter stood among the believers, a group numbering about 120. So we know that they're starting with about 120 people. And now we're going to look at Acts chapter 2, verse 41. So in Acts chapter 2, verse 41, it says this: Those who accepted his message, and his is Peter's, right? So those who accepted Peter's message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. So on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 people were added to the church. I mean, that means on the first day of the church, they became a megachurch, right? I mean, imagine 3,000 people in one day. All right, so we're going to skip down to Acts chapter 4, and we're going to look at verse 4. So Acts 4, verse 4 says this: But many who heard the message believed. So the number of men who believed grew to about 5,000. Now notice it says the number of men grew to 5,000. I mean, think about this. Wherever you have 5,000 men, I mean, how many women and children do you think you had? I mean, at least 10,000, right? So at this time, you probably have a church with at least 15,000 people worshiping in Jerusalem. So how big was the Church of Jerusalem in the book of Acts, you might be asking now, right? Well, probably 100,000 people in 20 years, or 8 chapters in the book of Acts. And I could keep going on, and trust me, I have cut some of this, but I encourage you to go through the book of Acts, to find out this stuff for yourself. But I'm going to sum it up this way. I mean, we have got rapid exponential growth in this church. And how do you get New Testament growth? You must use New Testament methodology, which we'll talk about. But the next question we have to ask is this. All right, so if the church was growing to 100,000 people, I mean, where did they put all these people? Well, the Bible tells us. So we're going to turn to Acts chapter 5, and we're going to read verse 42. So Acts 5, verse 42 says this: Day after day, in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. They met day after day in temple courts and from house to house. And there were multiple of these courts, in the temple. And in those days, they actually stood up for worship. And with multiple services, they could easily hold 100,000 people in these temple courts. Okay, but they also met, it says, from temple courts to house to house. Now, this dual strategy of large group worship and small group fellowship is the biblical strategy and structure for the church, not just then, but for today. And when we do it like the New Testament, we will have results like the New Testament. If we want to be biblical and follow the New Testament church, if we want to be successful, we must have temple courts, which is basically what we do on Sunday mornings here, and we must have house to house, and that's our small groups. We must have both large group worship and small group fellowship and discipleship, and that's how this church will thrive in 25. I mean, that is the biblical model in the book of Acts. And of course, all through the New Testament, you can find examples where Paul says, greet those who meet in the house of this person, and greet those who meet in the house of that person. Now, specifically in Romans 16, verse 5, Paul writes to the people in Rome and he says this. Romans 16:5 says, "Greet also the church that meets at their home." So they were meeting in house churches. They were meeting in home groups. Now, we call them small groups today, but anywhere else in the world, they are called house churches. Now, a house church and a small group are fundamentally the same thing. Okay, they're just terminology differences. I mean, meeting in homes, meeting at Starbucks, meeting in an office place, meeting at work or meeting in a classroom or lunchroom, it is the same thing. Now, if you want to know Cornerstone's secret of growth, it's this. For over 30 years now, we have met in temple courts and house to house. I mean, we have had large group worship and we have had small group fellowship. And we must grow larger and smaller at the same time. We go larger through Sunday worship and we grow smaller through small group fellowship and discipleship. All right, so that's point number one. Small groups are biblical. Now we're going to move to point number two. All right, small groups are biblical, and now small groups are personal. Small groups are personal. All right, so you grow more when you are able to ask questions and reflect with other people. And you really can't do that in a Sunday morning, right? Now, I've used this example before, but you can't interrupt Pastor Nathan when he's preaching and ask a question like, excuse me, Pastor Nathan, what did you mean by that? What was that application of that last point? Now, I suppose you could, but fair warning, okay? We do have a great security team around here, okay? So anyway, in a small group, you can ask questions. In a small group, you can pray specifically for people, and in a small group, you can get support. You can get that personal attention. And I say it's already up there. I call this the ABCs of small group. So A is accountability, okay? This is allowing other people to challenge you in your priorities and your relationships. And then B stands for a sense of belonging, okay? I mean, people need to know that they matter and that they will be missed if they don't show up. In a group this size, if a few of you decide, well, you know what, I'm going to take the next couple of weeks off and maybe I'll return after the Super Bowl, okay? I mean, maybe you'll be noticed, maybe not. But I promise you, if you're in a small group, somebody will probably reach out to you, okay? And you'll be missed. And then C stands for care. Small groups are the best environments to practice these ABCs. Now, I do want to give you an example of care, okay? So we had a small group member back in December, the first week of December, who was going to have hip replacement surgery, okay? So the day before hip replacement surgery, I reached out to Pastor Allen because he was the pastor on call that week. And I said, hey, how's Kevin doing? And he says, well, he's doing fine. He'd already received, some phone calls, some prayers and felt the support, right? So the day of surgery, I reached out to Pastor Allen again. I said, hey, how did Kevin's surgeries go? What's going on there? And he said, well, you know what? I talked to Kevin and he told me that after surgery, well, Alan said he was going to reach out to him later that night. He said that he had told Alan that, he would be too busy after surgery answering the phone calls and texts from his small group and friends first. That is the importance of community. And I love when I hear that response because that's when you know community is working. Now, let me give you a personal example of small groups, all right? I'm going to talk about my son, Noah. And my son, Noah, is 24 years old, and I hope you see a picture of him on the screen there. He's the guy in the middle there, right? He has known nothing else but small groups. He's actually the first generation in Cornerstone that has grown up with small groups in every environment. When he was in the elementary age, which is our Adventure Cove, he had a small group. And when he went over to the warehouse, middle and high school, he had small groups in those environments as well, right? We didn't always have small groups in those areas. And this is important because he made great friends and had small group leaders that impacted his life and attended special events in his life. He was able to talk about the message, age-specific issues, and had, small group leaders that checked in on him and also partnered with us parents, okay? Now, of course, he still had fun with his Christian friends and leaders, right? And many from his small group were groomsmen in his wedding that took place last year. And you see two of them right there in that picture. 6 years after leaving Cornerstone Church for college, he still has relationships with those people and leaders in his small group. That's why we still believe and support the philosophy and have small groups for every age in this church. You know, so now I want to give you a snapshot of my small group this past year. Now I know I've shared stories about my small group, but here's last year's update. So my small group picked up 2 new couples in the fall of 2023. And in January of 2024, our small group decided to study it, to do a Tony Evans study on the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. And we love that study, right? And Tony Evans filmed those sessions in Las Vegas. So what does my small group decide to do? Hey, why don't we take a vacation together in Las Vegas? All right. You really get to know people when you spend time away together. And we did have a great time, okay? I mean, of course, we enjoyed the sightseeing in Las Vegas. We did some national parks. We enjoyed great weather. The food is always amazing there, and just hanging out with friends, right? All right, for those of you who still on the fence about small groups, don't worry, okay? I know this is a big step. It takes time and trust to be able to spend time on vacation together, right? But I'm telling you, given that time, it is well worth it. I'd like to go into more detail, but you know the saying, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Okay, all right, that's right. All right, so after we got back, we were preparing for Noah and Natalie's wedding. That was going to be happening in July. And then Hannah, our daughter, and her soon-to-be husband, Luke, decided to move their wedding up to October. Now, imagine 2 of your kids getting married within a few months apart, right? Pretty stressful. I mean, I don't know how we would have gotten through it without the help and support of our small group. You know, I got with my wife and we wanted to sum it up. And really, we could take the rest of the sermon time thanking them for all the hard work that they've done, and even people here at the church, right? But we did want to say this. I mean, all the extra time, the details, the decorations. I mean, starting back in February when some of our small group drove over to St. Petersburg for Natalie's wedding shower and did all the decorations and made it an amazing event. And a couple in our small group, they lent us their Airbnb so that Natalie can host her wedding party. And they even did that for Hannah's wedding party in October. And remember, 2 weeks before Hannah's wedding, there was a hurricane that was happening. And we didn't even know if we were going to be able to even use the barn that we're going to use down the street here for flooding, right? But all the extra support, encouragement, prayers, and really the extra hours of the details and the decorations. I mean, they made, obviously it's a memorable event when your 2 kids get married, but they made it more memorable and extra special. And I can't thank them enough. And that's the importance of doing life together, right? Okay. All right. Now, both of my sons, Trevor and Noah, have moved recently to new areas, okay? Now, Trevor's a men's tennis coach at Ann Arbor, Michigan, home of the Michigan Wolverines. Any go blue out here? All right, tough crowd. Okay, all right. Well, anyway, remember, he is the father of the greatest grandson, Charlie, right? Okay? Do it, baby. You can do it. All right. So if nothing else, you got your cuteness overload for the day, right? Okay. Anyway, Trevor and Jordan have been in Ann Arbor for, almost 2 years now, and they have no family that lives near them. So how did they decide to make new friends and have a support system? They joined a small group. I mean, they see the importance of it. Now, Noah and Natalie, and I think their picture's coming up here. You remember they just got married in July. Well, they moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, and they have no family that lives around them. Now, how do you think they got connected to new friends? They joined a small group, right? Noah has a small group, a men's small group, and Natalie has a women's small group. And last is Hannah and Luke, okay? And I'm sure you've already guessed it, but Hannah had already moved up to Jacksonville for her college. And then once she graduated, she stayed up there to work at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. That is 2.5 hours away from family. And the first thing she did is get connected to a local church, which is wise, right? In fact, the pastor of that new church officiated the wedding here in St. Cloud. But once Luke had moved up there to Jacksonville with him, they are also connected to a small group in their church, right? It's funny. In January 15th, our small group decided to get back together after the holidays. And we're driving home from our small group, and guess who calls? Hannah. And guess where she was driving home from? Her small group. As a parent, obviously I couldn't be prouder. I mean, it obviously helps that they have grown up in a household that modeled it. And you remember from the last time that I taught here, how that generation, Gen Z, was really affected by the COVID pandemic, where isolation and loneliness were elevated, right? So that generation does see the need for community. Of course, ultimately, I give God the credit for instilling the values in my kids, right? I mean, small groups are personal and they do help you grow in community. All right, so now we're going to go to our next step here. So, small groups are biblical, small groups are personal, and finally, small groups are flexible. Okay? One thing about Sundays at Cornerstone here is they're pretty predictable, right? I mean, you can be sure that there will be two services at the 9 and 11 o'clock hour. But with small groups, you have the flexibility to decide when you will meet. My small group has changed nights of the week at least 3 times that I know of. I mean, when we first started our small group here at Cornerstone, we met on Sunday nights. We figured, well, we'll just give the whole day to God, right? But we usually let our group decide what works best for their schedule. So I know the first time we moved to a Thursday night because we had a lot of young families and, they played sports, so they were able to enjoy their kids on the weekend. And, last year, I know we moved to Wednesday nights. And again, I'm not even sure of the reason there, but it's just great to know that I love the flexibility to pick what works best for your season of life. And also you have the flexibility to pick a curriculum that you like. This upcoming semester, we do allow our leaders to choose, but you can find a topic that you like and sign up for that group. The fall semester is usually a church-wide campaign. It's nice once a year where everyone is kind of talking about the same thing. And we typically provide study guidance online, that goes with the sermon. Speaking of study guides, so I don't know if everybody got this on the way in, but on the front you see, all the important events of February. But on the back is a sample study guide of what I'm talking to you guys about today. And on the front you see, study guides, and there's a QR code. If you scan this QR code, you will have access on our website to all the study guides we've done for sermon series. And we've also done study guides for every episode of the Chosen series. And as Pastor Nathan mentioned, next week we kick off our sermon series on the Beatitudes that a group can do following this sermon. And we'll have study guides for that. You have the flexibility to pick when to do the study guide, what friends or neighbors to invite, and even where you want to meet. In our small group system, the group can meet on the day and time that they choose. That's the beauty of small groups being flexible. All right, so lastly, if you do decide to sign up for a small group, and at the end of that study you decide, that you don't connect with that group, it's okay to leave. Yeah, you heard me. It is okay, okay? It's okay to find a new group. Now, you might have to wait till the next semester, or maybe you can find me, and maybe I can find a group for you. But just because you don't like a particular small group doesn't mean that you give up on the concept of groups. It's like saying, well, I didn't like this doctor that I went to, so I'm never going to a doctor ever again. If I don't like a restaurant, if I go to a restaurant and eat a meal that I don't like, I don't say I'm never eating again. No, I make up for it with a better meal, right? And if you don't like your latest small group experience, I mean, that's okay. I mean, sometimes a small group just doesn't gel. You just don't give up on the concept, okay? We all need community. So I'm going to end with the best example of all. Now, I'm sure you've heard the expression, what would Jesus do, right? The bracelets, maybe WWJD. Well, Jesus' example is he chose 12 men to be in his small group. He mentored and did life with them for over 3 years. And I want to look at a passage where Jesus is talking to his disciples in John chapter 13, verses 34 and verse 35. So John 13:34 says this, I give you a new command. Love each other, just as I have loved you. So you also must love each other. I mean, this is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. Now, the Gospels record this as one of the final words and messages of Jesus. I mean, he knew that he was going to Jerusalem to die, right? And we might anticipate that Jesus had things that he wanted to make sure to say before he died, words that would continue to speak long after he was gone. So we are to seek to obey God's command to love one another. The New Testament records over 50 individual one another commands. And again, referring to this handout, you see a sampling of it in the inside of the bulletin here, one another's. So you see the love one another, honor one another, forgive one another, encourage one another. Ask yourself this: how many of these can we fully accomplish on a typical Sunday morning? All right. How about in a small group setting? Groups are the right place for these one another's to come to life in our church. The one another commands cannot be done on a 1 hour service on Sunday. So many of these commands involve our direct physical ministry to one another and to our neighbors. It happens best in proximity, right? Groups exist with community, for community with God and one another. We've talked about that. But small groups are the greatest opportunity this church has to consistently practice the one another commands of Scripture. And if you really want to thrive in 25, and again, I know that's kind of turning into cliche, right? But we really do want to help you grow in your relationship with God and to thrive, right? You need to be part of a community or a small group and practice these one another commands. To become more like Christ, we need to do what he taught us to do. And the best place to practice this is in a small group. Okay, so what do we do with all of this information, right? I'm glad you asked. All right, so what is the next step for you? Okay, it's going to look different for everybody, and that's okay, right? Maybe jumping into a small group is too big of an ask, and that's okay. I'm sure some of you just can't picture yourself plopping down on a stranger's couch, right? That's okay, but maybe it's getting to know people through serving together. We have a place for everyone to serve. We've got guest services, we have security, we have worship and tech, all the areas in the family ministry, right? Those are great areas to get to know people as you serve on a team. And it's a great step on your path towards community. All right, maybe it is joining a class like Pastor Nathan so greatly promoted during the offering. Thank you, sir. It starts next Sunday, February 9th at 10:45 in the Common Ground, and I'll be teaching that. But take advantage of that, because the reason that we offer this benefit is because we want to see you succeed in your finances. And guess what? You're probably going to be in a class with other people who want to win with money as well. So you've already got something in common with them. And maybe that's your next step to get to know people on your journey towards community. All right? And then, of course, we do want you to join or start a small group. We have got so many great small groups to choose from. And at this time, I do want my small group leaders to kind of stand up and work your way towards the back of the tables. If you're here, this is a good time to get up and go to the back of the tables there. Thank you guys for your support. We do have some great small group leaders, and they would love to answer questions that you have about small groups, and specifically about their own small group. On the back of the tables, we have cards for every small group that is available. So, on the front side here, if you scan this QR code, you'll see a list of all the small groups that are available. And on the front side is the specific information for their small group. So remember, you have the flexibility to decide, is this a curriculum that I want to go through? Does this work out for my night of the week and when I'm available? You have the flexibility to choose a small group that works for you. And after all that, if you still can't find a small group, maybe you need to start your own small group, right? And I would love to talk to you about that opportunity. I would help train you and encourage you and resource you so that you can be successful, because we do want small groups to be successful here. Again, that's part of the pastor strategy to be able to reach more people for Christ and more people in different neighborhoods around St. Cloud. All right, so I've given you the importance of small groups: biblical, personal, and flexible, okay? Now I want to end again with my own small group experiences, okay? So anybody who knows who I am kind of knows that I'm an introvert, okay? I really don't get charged being around a lot of people, okay? No offense intended, okay? But at the end, I'm probably a lot like you guys. At the end of a long, hard work day, the last thing that I want to do is get in my car and go to a small group. I'm already kind of emotionally drained, right? But I will say this: every time that I've done it over the past how many years that it's been, I have never regretted going to that small group. I go there, and of course, I've got friends that are there, right? but I've got people who will encourage you, who are there to grow in their relationship with Christ too. And you know what? No matter what I'm going through, I know I'm going to get this. I know I'm going to get a listening ear, right? I'm probably going to get some great godly advice. And I know that they're going to be praying for me. I mean, that's the beauty of small group. I shared last year's, all the great stuff that had happened, the 2 weddings and being able to go to Las Vegas together, right? I mean, it's great to celebrate with a group of friends. But, looking back over the last 5 years, I lost both my parents, and even in our small group, we lost 2 small group members that passed away. I mean, I don't know how you get through that alone. I don't want to, I'm driving home Tuesday night from the Ironman dinner, okay? And as I'm driving home, it only takes me about 15 minutes to get home. I'm hearing texts go off, boom, boom, boom. And I'm not, I'll just wait till I get home. And as I get home, I realize that one of our small group members, his brother passed away. And by the time that I got home, everyone else in our small group had already texted him, gave their condolences. We're praying for you. Hey, what can you do because he had to go to Trinidad for the funeral. What else can we do for your family? I mean, that is amazing. I don't know how you do life without that, I wouldn't trade one moment of my time in my small group. And I really just want everybody to experience that for yourselves. So I hope you take advantage of the small groups that we have back there. All right, let me close in prayer, okay? Father God, first of all, thank you that you love us. We're just so grateful for the love that you have for each and every one here in this room today. And we thank you that you did create us to be relational beings, that you created us for a need to have a relationship with you and with our fellow people around us, Lord. And Lord, I just pray that this week that we will be reminded of the commandment that Jesus gave us to love one another. I mean, this is how the world's going to know that we are your disciples, the love that we have one for another. So give us opportunities this week to be extensions of your love and grace. Give us opportunities to practice the one another's that has been provided today, Lord. I'm so grateful for this Thrive series. I can't think of a better way to start off 2025 than giving tools to help us grow more like Christ. So I just pray that we're not just hearers of the words that we've heard over the last 5 weeks, but we are doers of the word as well. Because really, at the end of the year, I pray that everyone in this room becomes more like your son, Jesus. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you, guys. God bless you. Have a Jesus-filled week. And please take advantage of the small group tables back there.